Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alistair Russell, and welcome to this virtual roundtable live. Our focus this afternoon or morning, evening, wherever you are in the world, is on the value of DevOps transformation. My colleagues in Inspired Business Media have got us together, and delighted that Colin Fletcher from GitLab are joining us as well, because their experience of supporting so many organizations in the development and delivering value from that approach that we've now labeled DevOps is really valuable. So delighted to welcome you. As I said, my name's Alistair Russell. I've been supporting and consulting and delivering, actually on the longer timescale, change and transformation in the way that we bring technology to organizations. I'm joined this afternoon by Sam Hill from the BBC and Colin Fletcher from GitLab. A fellow panelist, Steve from HSBC, is joining us soon, I understand. But there he is. Good afternoon. Just to remind you, you can submit audiences. I've got a sidebar here with questions as they're fed through to me, so you can use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions to our great panel. And during the session, the Inspired team on behalf of GitLab will be putting up a few poll questions just to get your insight on things. But so just if you see that appear, do click on and respond to those questions, because they all add to the knowledge we generate through this process. I've got a few questions that I've prepared with my colleagues here, really stimulated by some input we've had from all of you in the prep for this session. And first off, really to sort of level set us all, is to ask Steve and Sam in particular first off, and I'll come to you, Colin, last. Really just how do we define this thing that we have labeled DevOps, and what it means to you? And I guess because our focus is very much on business value, what does it mean to your organization as well? Sam, can I come to you first? This is quite interesting. I'm not handing the mic round or pointing at you on a stage at this stage, but I'll sort of signal who I'm coming to. Sam, if I come to you first, then to Steve, we'll come to you. So good to see you, Sam. What does DevOps mean to you in the BBC?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Or good morning, good evening, good night, as a phrase I think on the BBC may have gone. DevOps for me and the BBC, sort of like it's where the development team and the operations teams are working together, rather than these sort of traditional sort of develop and then hand over the product or change or whatever to an operations team and the developers forget about it. It's DevOps for us came about with the increasing rate of software that we're developing. We've started to use continuous delivery, and as a result, the old operational models that we use just no longer really works in that way. So DevOps is often sort of assumed to be sort of developers are acting as the operations teams. We don't see that for us. We don't see it as an implicit or explicit assumption, actually. We see it more as the two areas working together. And it's more for us, developers need to be aware of the operational needs as and when they're building the code and writing their systems, and think about operations from the front. But they're not necessarily the operation people at the end. We still have, where we are the development teams, we still got operations teams. We don't have any DevOps teams per se, teams that is actually DevOps. What we don't have though is the wall between the two worlds anymore. There's no release boards, there's no approval boards, there's no change boards, there's no change labs, there's none of that. There's no gated systems at all. The development teams follow CI/CD type approaches, and they release to production whenever things pass the test and are ready to go. And the teams themselves determine what that looks like. It's not for anyone else. There's no approval needed. And just click a button, and if it releases, it goes. And then they work with the operations teams on what those changes will do and mean. So they will update their run books, they provide them with tooling, scripts to maintain things, and so on. So they have that operational focus from the beginning for the issues and support. For us, really, it's the developers think about how something is operated just as much as the feature there is they're adding onto the software. But the
Yeah.
operations teams are still there to run it day to day.
Thank you. I mean, we'll dig into a few of those issues a bit deeper. But one of the things I'm always interested in is the organizational unit. So you do see in, I guess, some of the smaller organizations that are more digital native, as we might say, they would be organized along end-to-end product or service line rather than as you describe it. But if we dig into that a bit later on, that's brilliant, Sam. And Steve, a much even bigger beast globally in terms of an IT shop, I know. What does DevOps mean to you?
Oh, it means different things to different people. As far as the business are concerned, top down, we've been DevOps for a few years. Actually, and this follows up from what Sam was saying. We've only truly been DevOps in certain areas for very recently. And that's simply because, for most of us internally, HSBC stands for how simple becomes complicated, right? We've got more process than you know what to do with. And nowhere is this seen more than, let's say, system development. So, the architectural boards, things like external hosting approvals, things like security, cybersecurity, legal compliance. Oh, dear me. The list, unfortunately, is almost endless, although it isn't clearly. Now, what has happened in very recent terms is that teams have been organized along service delivery lines and are supposed to be fully self-contained, i.e. they have all the ingredients, if you like, of resourcing internal to that team that is required to introduce, run and manage a service. This isn't the case. I mean, just like Sam said, operations team still operation. DevOps, fine. Ops, not so much. So I participate on some of the architectural approval boards, and we forever get some new, keen, young, agile team who believe they're doing DevOps. And then you'll ask them a few pointed questions about the backup strategy, and they say, oh, no, somebody else does that. Mm-hmm. No, they don't. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to do it. What's your backup strategy? Oh, we better come back. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's clearly I'm painting a tainted picture, as it were. However, some teams it's very natural for. Other teams, no, it's an alien thing. Plus, I would have to say, we're organised in terms of pods, which are small DevOps units, as they were. But some of these teams are embedded within much, much larger platforms. I mean, if you take the transactional banking platform, for example, there are scores of pods in there. So there's no way any of these individual teams can be responsible for their end-to-end service provision. It's simply not possible. Okay, so there is a natural divide between what these teams are responsible for and the delivery of the service as a whole. Okay, so it's DevOps. What does it mean to the business? It means that we've now broken apart some of the old IT silos, the old IT monoliths. We now have them in what are supposed to be self-organized, self-managed teams. To a greater or lesser extent, that's probably true nowadays. Okay, and of course, because the consultants told them that by adopting DevOps we can make 10% improvements, they got rid of 10% of the people.
Taken that, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think the breaking the IT silos is certainly in the large, been around for 25, 30, maybe 40 years IT shops. I wonder whether that's one of the most significant benefits. Colin, your perspective from being a supporter and an enabler and an improver of this, I'd value now. And I've also had a question that I'll come back to because it's relatively straightforward, but I do want to answer it about the positioning of QA and continuous testing within the DevOps framework. So somebody's actually asked that question, so I'll come to that. But Colin, first up, how do you see it from your perspective?
Sure. Unfortunately, like many, I've got too many perspectives on it, kind of rattling around in my head from different life experiences with what we now kind of call DevOps. But I would in large part agree with what I heard from Sam and Steve and others among our community and our customers, is that the key thing about DevOps, or what it means to us, is it's effectively a cultural change. It's a mindset change that manifests itself in multiple ways, depending on how someone's going about it. But in some ways, it is as simple as the phrase that I will mangle. It's what it says on the tin. It's Dev and Ops together closely, more closely than ever before. And I also view it personally in this role that I serve here at GitLab, and in my previous lives, kind of watching DevOps emerge as an industry analyst. I actually view it as essentially a good way to describe the latest generational change. And I mean that literally when I use the word generational change or evolution. It's a step and representative of a set of generations of people redefining, seeing an opportunity to, and finding the need to, and doing so, kind of redefine what does it mean to actually deliver the technology that organizations need to accomplish whatever their goals are, and against whatever those priorities are. So I know that that's super high level, incredibly broad, all of these things, but in some ways, at least for us as a GitLab community in particular, so some people sometimes shrug when they see it. But one of the things that you'll find anytime you interact with GitLab, the company or the community or all of the above, is that we talk a lot about values. And that's what we literally, some people find it a bit odd that we will always cite like specific values that we align with. And the first of those key values is collaboration, and it's collaboration for a reason. There's others, but I won't bore the audience with that. You can look it up on our handbook. But anyway.
Thank you. That's a helpful perspective. Certainly, I'd endorse this is part of an enduring journey from that gets the valuable zeros and ones in whatever configuration they're presented in front of the organization. So if I want to make sure I answer these questions, because engagement. Sure. So how important is for your organizations to consider QA ops or continuous testing within the DevOps framework? From Sarah Sranapatu. I don't know if that's Sam, is that something you can respond to? If I just one of us sort of give a view on that, that would be good.
I can do.
Please.
I will do then. I think QA is very important. QA, it depends on like lots of things. There's lots of ways you can define what QA is. So, do we have testers at the BBC? Not really anymore. We have software engineers that specialise in testing. So all of the tests are created and crafted in an automated way. So it's more sort of their engineers who focus more on how to build and craft the tests. Because if you want to go into a CI/CD sort of model that sort of plays into the DevOps space around continuous releases, then you don't really want to have a step where it requires a lot of manual testing in that process. So the focus is more on the quality gate that is on how do you pass all the tests, but the tests have to be automatable. Hence the sort of switch from a classic tester being a more of a manual functional integrational type tester to being a software engineer who writes code to break other people's code as a craft instead, and then puts that into the release path, release chain. Hence my point really at the start is, yeah, QA type quality assurance of output is vitally important, because you don't have, certainly not in our world, any of those other classical siloed based control gates of the wall of passing from developers to operations as used to exist. Yeah. You take that wall away and you take away a change approval board and various other gates, you then have to, you still have to replace that, but just in a different form. And that's the key bit.
Thank you. And the second question I had in, and Steve, if you could maybe think about this. Someone's actually asked, somebody called anonymous attendee, so obviously don't want to associate themselves with this question. Is it wrong to have a DevOps team? Not quite sure.
I think it certainly can be. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Listen, I'll have to use that cop-out answer. It depends.
Yeah.
So for where you've got, for many of the circumstances in the bank where you actually do have bespoke development going on, as opposed to teams which are doing a job of integration. They're using the big ticket systems, and here I'm talking the Oracles, the SAPs, and the rest of it. You wouldn't really call what those teams are doing as development. It's critical stuff, okay, but it's more integration and configuration than it is development, all right? So for the teams that are doing bespoke work, I think we tend to draw a distinction between the heavy lifting to create a service and put it online, and then the BAU work to take it forwards. So, for example, my division looks after web hosting, and I've got about 170 odd websites that we look after and take forwards as a BAU. So we've got full end-to-end DevOps pipelines, CI/CD, and the way that we would organise around this is that there are, as Sam was just saying, we haven't lost any of the checkpoints or the gates, but they have mutated into a more automated form. So, you know, it's impossible for a developer to promote work from their laptop to UAT, SIT, you know, production in one go. They simply cannot do it, okay? So there are automated gateways and checkpoints that must be passed before that code can be produced. And there are several different types. I mean, you say Q&A. For me, that's about 5 or 6 different areas right there. One is linting, quality of the code. Is it readable? Is it sustainable? Is it functionally correct? Does it have unit testing? Then there's security vulnerabilities, you know, OWASP top 10, has it been scanned? Has it got a clean report? Okay, then, and it goes on and on. We have maybe 4 or 5 different code scanning technologies that all have to give a green report before you're allowed to promote that code through to production. And to make that distinction, because, dare I say, you know, a full DevOps team who is personally responsible all the way through to publishing and actually going live with the service, you run the risk of the poachers being the gamekeepers. Yeah. I'll be honest, okay? Yeah. The developers are focused on getting the stuff out the door. The ops people, you know, over my dead body will you release something with bugs in. So there is a philosophical distance between those two teams. The way we take care of it is that there will be someone who's responsible for that last step in publishing a product or a software or service out to production, and they have to be shown all those ticks in all those boxes before they'll even consider releasing it. So we do make that distinction with the production release at the end of the cycle.
I think has to be true in the regulated environment you operate in pharma and many other places. But I think it makes good business sense to do that separation of powers or definition of powers. Thank you guys. If we can move on, in some ways you've signaled this here, Steve, but so I'll just see whether my reading of what it's like in HSBC. But the next question we settled on was how broadly applicable is DevOps? And you sort of, my sense is no, it's not a ubiquitous panacea for everything. But you know, the question is, how broadly applicable is it? Is it only relevant in the most modern of technologies where people are, you know, using Python or R or whatever? They're doing something that's brand new, whizzy, sexy. Have you, from yourself and Sam, if you've got anything to add after Steve, that would be good.
So the interesting thing I saw is that some of the mainframe teams are bringing DevOps technologies and tooling to bear. Okay, now we've got a concept at the moment of toil. Right now, toil is work that should be and could be automated, but isn't for whatever reason. Okay. And there's a real focus on reducing toil. Okay, so certainly in terms of the tools and procedures that are going into place now, then let's call it the DevOps tool chains are being much more widely adopted.
Yeah.
Now, there is also, I find, a bit of a confusion between if is a team DevOps? Oh, well, they're agile. No. That's not what I'm asking. Are they DevOps? So there is a confusion between using the agile methodologies and the rest of it, and a fully equipped CI/CD pipeline. So, I mean, there are challenges in the bank. You're absolutely right. So when they first tried to introduce agile, they say we want to be more like Google, move fast and break stuff, and everyone just went break stuff.
Yes.
I don't think so. No, actually, So there is this very much this, trying to play pop music to granddad type of sort of, I wouldn't call it a generational mismatch, but certainly, with younger technologists coming into the bank, I'm finding it increasingly more difficult to instill in them the sort of proper discipline when they're being raised on all the new agile technologies, and discipline goes out the window. That's the first thing. For me, you can throw away the rule book once you've read it and understand it. Right? Nowadays, it's like they don't even know there's a rule book. So it's a bit of an issue there. But yeah, it's the confusion between what DevOps as a phrase actually means. And it didn't surprise me to see there that the poll said that on this call, 100% of people think we need more definition. Doesn't surprise me the slightest.
Yeah. And certainly from my perspective, the most important thing, and I think it reinforces one of the things you were saying, Colin, is how a method or a framework or its supporting tool set enables people to do things differently and better in whatever it better means in a business context. And I think that's hugely important. When it comes down to it, it's about people doing things differently. Anything to add to that sort of how broadly applicable question, Sam, for you?
I think this highlights a bit of a difference between the two industries that myself and Steve work within, in reality. I'm in broadcast in varying forms. So the equivalent of the online newspaper, which is the BBC News website, versus iPlayer, which is video streaming, or BBC Sounds, which is audio. Yeah. The world I live in is not really regulated. Yes, there's Ofcom, but that's about content. That's not about how we go about operating as a business. There's very little, if any, finance actually involved, and pretty much all of our consumption is in a read model. We push stuff out. The only real interaction we get is people logging in, and obviously we need to do some care around data security around usernames and passwords. All of that checks. But the rest of it, once you've logged into iPlayer and you're watching the videos, it's all just, you click a button, you get some recommendations, it's all pushed down to you, it's all read only. And that as an organizational model means DevOps does fit as a business, that cycle of continuous change, because you want to be able to try more things out. And you can, to misquote Steve, but we can be a bit more Google-like and get away and break a few things, because as long as we don't completely break the play button, so you can't actually watch a video clip, if we happen to move the play button around on the screen or change its color because we're trying out different experiments, you can do that in that non-regulated, that read-only consumption model. You can be a bit more brave about the changes you're making, because the implications of it are not that great. If we slow down how quickly you can read a news article, or say the top 10 bit panel on the left-hand side of the page, or right-hand side, depending on how you look at it, is missing, it doesn't stop you reading the rest of the story. So we can get away with a bit more. And therefore, the DevOps approach around giving the teams that bit more freedom to remove all the control gates, not take them away, but remove them in terms of as a barrier for releasing change, allows that better flow of agility and responsiveness to customers' needs, wants, and so on.
Are your enterprise systems people, finance, procurement, HR, are they organized in the DevOps way?
No.
Okay, so okay.
But
so
quite a lot of that is box application, to be fair to it. But
yeah. And okay, so it is you're talking primarily about the content world that you. Yeah.
That's what the BBC is about. It's about getting content to people. There's 700 odd software engineers working that space. It's not a small bit.
No, I understand. I understand. It's I'm trying to push for clarity on. Some people are asking, well, it's only for the new world, and certainly the perspective I'm getting from Steve is no, that's not true. It is certainly some of the back end been around for years stuff is also getting organised in that way. So that's good.
Well, certainly one realisation that's driving that is that the teams that are successfully DevOps and Agile are running rings around the older methodologies. There's no two ways about it, and that's been seen. And I think there is tremendous backing, if you like, or pressure even, to convert most of the development work and engineering inside the bank to run along those lines, because it is seen as being optimal. Now, I think the problem is, yes, HSBC is vast, but there's a real dichotomy here, right? Because the whole thing about DevOps and the agile ways of working is to basically make the development team fully responsible for their own services. In other words, that we want them to use initiative and to go and charge at it. In the same breath, the bank is absolutely not willing to surrender control and to see people use initiative. Good Lord, what a quaint idea. So there's a real dichotomy, right, between on the one hand embracing flexibility and agility, and the other hand absolutely not being able to tolerate it. And it is that extreme, and the tension in the middle. Some teams are more successful than others, to be perfectly frank. And I think it comes down to environment. It also does come down to domain. There are some areas where it's almost, the overwork is seen by some agile teams as gold plating the code. And from another perspective, it's like seen as its confidence is high, quality is paramount, it's got to be right. Mm-hmm. So as I say, there is this dynamic tension across and between the teams.
Brilliant, thank you. The next area I was going to move on to, but Colin, I noticed you took yourself off mute there, so I don't know whether you wanted to add to that sort of the applicability of DevOps.
Just at the high, again at a broader level, I think even just in these between both Steve and Sam's perspectives mirror a lot of our customers and communities experiences. I guess the point of it is like, even in some of the examples given, is that for some reason, perhaps it's our technological bent to think in binary terms. There's a certain absolutism or purity to, towards adopting DevOps. And in many organizations, that's kind of how it's introduced in kind of a dogmatic kind of way necessarily, and I just think that's the wrong way to kind of think about it. If you think about how applicable it is, there are things about DevOps, right, in terms of how people can work together. Are there particular tools that could be adopted? Let's have the conversation in a transparent way about what are the incentives of particular groups? Why did they evolve, in response to what the organization, or ultimately the customer, who is the customer or set of customers, what do they want from us? What do they want from us now? That can be internal and external and some combination of that. That there is something there in most cases that can and probably should be at a minimum discussed, at a maximum something done about. I just don't see, unfortunately, things don't always get approached in that kind of open way to figure out what of these things can happen. In the meantime, as Steve noted, right, there and others note, there are people that go and do. They just go and do at a team level or within certain applications or services where there is, the degrees of freedom or liberty available, and they're able to just go and do. So in the face of that, that hopefully continues to serve as a positive gravity. I have to believe, to keep pulling people forward into whatever is the next right iteration of that particular service, that particular application, that particular capability. So, that's all I'd say to that.
That's a good point. And in the spirit of looking to be useful to everybody that's that joined us live here, The next question I was just going to take us to was how did DevOps get started in your organization? And I know, Sam, when we were talking on our sort of get-together call earlier on, you were saying the start of it predates your experience in BBC. But where would you say what was the stimulus, if you like? What was the business stimulus or the enterprise stimulus to getting started with this?
The enterprise stimulus for the BBC was the London Olympics in 2012. So there was a big need they were the broadcast partner for the Olympics because it's in the UK, and BBC is obviously the primary broadcaster in the UK. That space, how do you stream, capture, support all of the events going live at the same time? There's a desire to broadcast every single event that was running in parallel at the same time. You can't do that over the broadcast medium, so that all got layered into iPlayer. And all of the systems at that point in time were running in-house in our own data centers. And so there's a view, obviously I wasn't here at the point in time the discussion was going on, but a view that the current systems could not easily be adapted to achieve that in the period of time available, so that you can procure the extra kit and so on needed. So it was linked up really to a move to cloud at that point in time as well. And that gave an opportunity to rethink how releases were done and some of the other approaches around it of, like, if we're moving our systems to cloud, let's repackage and reapproach how we go about doing our releases. And with a fixed date of the Olympics coming up as well, what opportunities do we have to do things differently to help make sure we hit the time on the target?
Yeah. So
and that was sort of like the catalyst that drove that change. It wasn't a sudden desire of people coming and going, oh, DevOps, it's the new buzzword, new thing, let's go and try it. It was more, it became part of an answer to the approach to a big event that's going on, and seen as the way to help solve it. Would it have worked without doing things or switching toward the DevOps model? Hard to say. There's no quantitative data I can point to one way or the other on that to say whether DevOps was required. It did help in terms of it gave more freedom to the teams to be able to release things in a more dynamic way, but it also brought the responsibility back onto those teams to think about, like, you're building these new systems, they've got to scale, they've got to operate, they've got to perform, they've got to meet all the usual cadence. And now, because of being more DevOps about it, you're responsible for that operational side as well. So, and that factored into, rather than just sort of building out the features, it was much more, how do we build out the operational side in parallel? It changed the mindset shift around that.
Thank you. And Steve, you signaled this a little earlier on. This was an internal cost saving drive. Somebody waved some 10% OPEX at the exec, and they said, "Oh, we'll have some of that."
Yeah, absolutely. They love that. So my team's a little unusual. We're very self-defined, and we've always owned our services, as the American expression goes, from soup to nuts. Mm-hmm. So we're actually quite unusual, and that gave us a bit of a superpower, to be honest. In other words, we already were responsible for dev all the way through to production. But again, it was siloed, even within our small team. Small team, we started out with about 170 people, let's say, I don't know, about 8 years ago. We're now down, actually, to under 70 people. And we're doing, I don't know, 3-4 times as much. Now, that was driven as much by the various culling and reorganization episodes as by anything else. And it got to the point where, I'm going to go back now 5 years, we made the move across to Azure cloud hosting. And we were the first team in the whole of the bank to put a production workload on public cloud. It took us 18 months, and all that was preparation. The actual migration went flawlessly and only took a couple of weeks, okay? It was preparation. And a lot of that is just persuading people like cybersecurity that no, public cloud is good. I had the same conversation 50, 100 times, just educating people through to this. Right, so DevOps, we had no choice, all right, because we were now cut down so fine. So I took the decision that when we moved to Azure, we went across fully automated with a zero touch, i.e. no manual intervention on any of our virtual estate. So we moved from 12 physical servers to just under 300 virtual servers now, running, as I said, about 170 websites, and it's all fully automated, because there's no way we could run that estate manually, and certainly not with the reduction in team size. And when you reduce the team size that way, automation is everything. So, you know, if I had one flag to put up for the people watching and participating there, my honest opinion is automation is absolutely critical to DevOps. And it's both a driver and a consumer of automation. Yeah, so DevOps really won't work properly unless you've got a high degree of automation. And likely, if you are, you know, blessed with the ability to put a high degree of automation in place into, you know, your tool chain, then DevOps, I think, comes naturally into place. You know, so it's both an enabler and consumers, as I say.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And in making this or keeping this sustained, because I mean, clearly HSBC and BBC have been at DevOps for many years. How are you continuing to demonstrate the value of it? I mean, clearly you gave us some signals there, Steve, in terms of you're doing more and you're doing it with a smaller team, and probably you're doing it faster as well. You know,
well, I mentioned earlier there's a drive to reduce toil,
yeah.
Okay, which is the work that should be automated but isn't. And this is on the back of we've now got all dashboards like any number of dashboards, KPIs, indicators, all this good stuff coming in now. And some of the metrics I think they're chasing are rubbish and others are actually quite useful. Now, I'll give you one instance. So a classic measurement of the success of DevOps is number of production releases per 10 members of staff, say, because the average team size is 10, right? So, which is actually quite large in agile terms, but anyway. So those metrics, I mean, some of the teams have got amazing graphs, and then you sort of dig into it and you think, oh, geez, come on, you do a deployment at the drop of a hat. I know that's properly DevOps, but where's the business value? Where's the incremental value to the business? That's actually decreased to almost nothing. But then some of these teams have gone from monoliths where they would do quarterly releases,
yes,
to doing maybe a release a week.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, there would be a decrease in the increment of business value. There would be, naturally, you know. Okay, you can't expect a quarter's worth of work to be done in a week. Okay, so that's a natural thing. But my point here is that these numbers are very open to interpretation. You have to be very careful. You're comparing apples with apples. Yeah.
Right.
So some of the other metrics that they'll have is things like story points. No, I mean, I'm sorry. You know, there's so many teams inside the bank that game these numbers. You know, it's like, oh no, yes, that used to be 10 story points. Now it's 100. It's like, oh, really? So again, it all comes down to, let's say, some kind of standardization. But the bottom line here is we are being measured. We are trying to use the yardstick. We are getting, broadly speaking now, I'm starting to see standardized KPIs with which to assess the various teams. The problem is, for me, and this is my own personal opinion, is when senior management get their hands on a dashboard and a bunch of metrics, they feel the need to manage on the basis of it. And of course, you know, as you can tell, I'm a little bit skeptical about the value of some of these statistics. And if they're managing IT on the basis of some of these statistics, it's got to be a bit of a cause for concern, really.
Yeah. Sam, I'd love you, you know, in different sector, different reasons, the sort of measures that you see would be interesting to hear about. And how do you ongoingly demonstrate value? Yeah, there are too many things of interest, so I'll not call it out loud. But if we get time, I'll come back to shifting left in terms of the thinking, which I think is how that move from quarterly releases to releases a week, number of releases a week, and continuous integration, and where I've seen in some of the clients I work with, that thinking, that pace, that clock cycle speed, moving left in the organization to the product and in enabling a comprehensive pace change. But that's, if we get time, I'll come to that. But Sam, specifically, demonstrating value of DevOps, what do you see?
DevOps is a real tricky one to demonstrate the value of, I would say. I agree with what Steve was saying in terms of but we don't have those metrics. We don't look at them. We don't look at the number of releases. It's a fake metric, really. We don't look at the number of code lines changed or number of lines of code implemented. fake metrics, story points, fake metrics. They're all gameable. They're all meaningless, actually. What does it mean if your number of code lines is going up or down over a fortnightly basis or something like that? Doesn't tell you anything in reality. Not useful data. We use SLI type models, so service level indicators, and we measure a metric against those. So how well is the system performing now versus how it was performing a week ago, a month ago? What's our expected level of service for the system, and what's the data point now after a number of releases? Is it moving up or down? Are things getting better, faster, or slower? And we measure true sort of targeted sort of indications. So like take an iPlayer, number of play starts, but it's not just how many people click the play button, used as metric. That depends entirely on what content's gone out that week or time, or this is doing an announcement. It's more, what's the time delay between someone clicking play and the video playback starting? Because if people have been changing the systems in that space and that gap is increasing or decreasing, then we can measure the performance of the releases that people are doing and how effective the change it is. And we can use that to sort of help measure that, and the number of failed plays as well. If that as a service level indicator goes up or down, then that can help us to understand sort of like the operational impact of change. And that's more sort of how we measure the output from DevOps. It's more, we look at the indicators of how we expect our services to be operating and let's see how they change over time. In terms of the wider DevOps value, has it saved money? We still have an operations team, still got 24/7 support system and service. They are the first line, and quite often they're the second line. So the developers will create runbooks, they'll create help guides, they'll create scripts. That's the operational mindset of a DevOps approach. The operational teams, they can click the buttons to do various interventions to keep things running. The teams are on call all the time. They're the third line. They're not first or second line. And so, are we classically DevOps? No, but it's probably similar to what Steve was saying in terms of all of the teams. There's about 700 engineers, hundreds of teams in reality. They all have to come together to produce what the VXC output is. No one team can be on call responsible for the whole setup. It doesn't work like that. Hence why there's a need for an operational barrier. The value we're looking at is more how we move beyond that DevOps model and looking toward more of the SRE style. And it touched on the toil point that Steve made as well. How much of the operational side can we now engineer into software and automate? So automating scaling up, scaling down, automating runbooks as well. So when a service level indicator or service metric drops below a certain point, automatically launch one this intervention and get the system to be a bit more self-healing. So you start to reduce the operation bit actually in the DevOps model to become more dev and less ops over time. And that's where our focused value is shifting now, because there are cost savings, there's opportunities to be taken in that space.
Brilliant, thank you. And Colin, your perspective I think will be really useful here, because you're obviously selling something, a tool set and capability into these organizations, so you need to demonstrate value as well. What do you see clients using as the ways of demonstrating the value from DevOps?
Well, there's always a bit of kind of ebb and flow. I'll describe it kind of as the pattern that we've typically seen. And then we've needed to do different things to respond to that shift. So, earlier on, and particularly within that kind of team adoption level, we still see a primary focus around things like the DORA metrics that many of you may be familiar with. So a lot of discussion around lead time, around cycle time, around work in progress, flow efficiency, velocity kind of metrics. So just trying to see, is there a semblance of kind of movement, of progression of things throughout? Now, the thing that's been interesting and different as folks are either expanding their use of our product and services or similar DevOps tool chains is that the conversation has shifted dramatically towards things that point to some form of business value, quantifiable benefit, ultimately that gets tied to some kind of currency value of some kind. And generally, it's been interesting to see that response kind of coalesce. If you could think of a few phases of the DevOps cycle, particularly around creating the code, verifying it, deploying it, we found the need, our customers asked us to help them better understand what that business value is. We did a study with Forrester Consulting rather, to go do some of the time and effort studies around it. And we generally saw, some quantifiable benefits around development and delivery efficiency, of which is that kind of literal time view of effort spent at a very simplistic level. There are folks that are measuring and looking at certainly number of releases as having some kind of intangible or tangible impact on revenue generation opportunities. That's there. But I think the ones that outside of the development and delivery efficiency metrics, so time reduction there, where a lot of the discussion ends up happening is around improved code quality in terms of measuring the number of defects, automatically identified and or resolved in some way, reduced, that get pushed out. That comes to that automation value and the question earlier from the audience around, automating, where does QA fit? Where does automated testing fit? There's a lot of automation opportunity for a lot of us, and folks have seen a lot of value there. We created a tool to help quantify some of that. And then ultimately, we also continue to see a lot of folks in that kind of ebb and flow from the sprawl of the DevOps tool chain. So many tools, different tool chains for every team kind of situation and everything that comes with that. We've also started to see teams ask to help measure the value of tools consolidation and what those benefits are around educational requirements, around maintenance requirements, around all of the things that come with that. So tool savings, code quality, and efficiency.
Thank you. And actually, continuing on the automation theme, there's a question coming from our audience, from Pedro Silva. So thank you for this, Pedro. He described it as being for Steve mostly, standardization being really important. Yeah, I absolutely agree. This notion of this being a Wild West, this is actually a controlled, even more tightly controlled world in my view. And he's asking, how difficult was it to start the automation process? How long did it take you to get there? And then he's getting even more specific about do you use in-house software for testing or get something from the market? But I think it's a line of discussion we've had so far. How difficult was it to start in this automation path?
I think they recognised immediately that it was a step change in technologies, certainly for the bank. My own division, we're a little bit odd. I mean, we started out using .NET technologies simply because the rest of the bank was in Java, right? And we wanted to make a break, right? It was quite deliberate on our part. So for us, many of the, let's call it standardized tooling did not apply. That gave us the freedom then to go and get the tooling that we felt appropriate. Now, we're now in the new world, and good Lord, some teams are even coding in Python and stuff, and using AI and all this sort of sexy stuff and blockchain. So it's very much a different landscape now. But what was noticeable is that the bank created a new, very senior IT role to head DevOps tooling. Okay, so there was a central team who did most of the heavy lifting to onboard a lot of the tooling, to provide guidance, sort out enterprise licensing, all of this sort of good stuff, right? And that, I think, was of huge benefit to many, many teams across the bank. How many apps we got? Thousands. I think there's 7,500 workloads are currently being transitioned into cloud. We're really, the directive now is buy, don't build, cloud first. There's a number of these things, but they're absolutely serious about it. And we use all four of the global cloud providers. So, GCP, AWS, Azure, and Ali. And we are very, very careful to avoid over concentration, either on certain vendors, suppliers, even tool sets. Yeah, so it is a challenge working with a bank. I'll make no bones about it. And the sheer variety of apps and the sheer variety of teams mean that quite often standardizing on a certain toolkit, a certain set of tooling, is actually very difficult. For some it works really well, for others it doesn't at all. Okay, so there is an acceptance that there is some allowance. However, there are governance procedures in place from architecture, through to sort of production and IT infrastructure delivery teams that provide the checks and balances. And of course now, we've been in the news for all the wrong reasons, but the share price is really hurting at the moment. So there is scrutiny on investment, certainly. Okay, but if you've got a good case for it, a good justification, and you can show, consistent savings or consistent business value from what you're doing, then you can get these things justified. So, yes, there's an aim to standardize. There's also a recognition that one size doesn't fit all. And the outlier teams, generally speaking, are allowed the latitude to deploy tool sets that are more appropriate to their domain.
Interesting, thank you. I want to be respectful of our scheduled time, and I also know we started a few minutes late, so I'll look to bring this to a close in maximum 5 minutes, guys. So I think the typical closing question, I think it's really relevant based on this discussion, is to do the lessons learned question, if you like. So for all three of you, from your own perspective, what pitfalls would you flag up to our audience to avoid from your journeys, from your perspective? Sam, if I come to you first, since we've just had, we'll give Steve a breather to think about what his response was. But what's your lessons learned about this DevOps journey that you'd like to share with the audience? That'd be brilliant.
Thank you. I'll speak more generally rather than just sort of specifically about BBC or anyone like that. I'll talk about sort of my personal sort of experience along that way as well. DevOps, it's been a bit of a buzzword, it's a bit of a buzz phrase. It doesn't have a standardized definition. It has a lot of interpretations. Don't jump on DevOps as a bandwagon of this is a way forwards to solve a problem. If you don't know quite what the problem is, look at it as it's a part of a puzzle and a suite of answers that can help businesses. It can also cause more problems than it's probably worth as well, depending on what the organization is and what it's trying to achieve. So it's better to understand what your goals are and then look to see if DevOps can help and support that or not. And there's lots of alternative ways and different things you can do around in the same sort of space. Isn't just about, let's just try DevOps. And in some cases, let's just merge the engineers and the operations teams. Let's take a couple of operations people and sit them into each squad. I've seen them done in other organizations as well. And just like, therefore now they're a DevOps team as such. And it's just like, that doesn't work either. And so you need to understand every business is different. We've talked about two quite different businesses here, enterprises, quite different approaches, quite different responses, but that's reflective of the spaces that they operate in. And that's been my key lesson, is understand your own business, your own problem space first, then look to see where the solutions fit rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I'll just really endorse that, Sam. Thank you. I've seen embedding technology folk within law practices in a big law firm work really well, and equally I've seen it work less well in other places. Totally endorse that. And Steve, your lessons learned, your pitfall to avoid for our audience.
DevOps. You can't prescribe it. You can't make it a top-down diktat. That's what happened in the bank. And what happened is that when you embed production people with dev teams, you get frustration, unbelievable frustrations from both sides, right? The devs can't believe the restrictions that the production people insist upon, and the production people can't believe how slapdash the devs are. All right, so there really has to be a overall directive or guidance to what they achieve. The second thing is, and I know I said it earlier, automation is key, but automation doesn't occur overnight. You've got to invest in this, and by invest, I mean you need to give the dev teams a little bit of room. Okay, you literally need to let them take 2 steps back to be able to make the 6 steps forwards. All right, so automation. Our last area of automation that we're having, I wouldn't say a challenge with, is the final end user testing for websites. And the fact is, it's a very, very manual process. We need people to look and click and make sure stuff happens the way it's supposed to happen and it looks the way it's supposed to look. Now, you might think automation hasn't got a part to play here. It does. But when the limited amount of testers that we have embedded in these DevOps teams, they are run off their feet with their day-to-day work, right? So how on earth are they supposed to stop and create all this automation? So my point here is you need to give the team space to allow them some resource to invest in their own automation. So in our sprint cycle for the teams that are running Scrum, we add some of these tasks as a necessary overhead into their sprint cycle. For the teams that are running Kanban, we give them a thread of Kanban tasks, which are to produce and to develop the automation. So my point here is it doesn't happen overnight, it doesn't happen by magic. You've actually got to work to get the automation to be able to change gear and start things moving faster.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Colin, your perspective, as ever, will be hugely important to us here. So we've got some great specific, if you like, enterprise-centered views from Sam and Steve. But what do you see across the world where you're supporting organizations?
I do think it still comes down to a couple of kind of key areas. One is recognizing that one of the reasons why it's so hard to define what DevOps is that we are talking about a combination of things here. It's not just a technology thing. It's not just a working style thing. It's not just an organizational structure. It's not just a cultural change, right? It is multifaceted. And, often I think in search of simplicity of what to do first or next, there's a gravitation to something, one of those axes or opportunities that for no other reason than it's the one that feels like we're already doing to some extent, as opposed to having the hard conversation first about, do we need to first think about what cultural attributes we need to instill? Do our incentives actually align with that? So by the time that we organize or we implement certain tools or procedures, and we don't have to have some of this tension because it is understood and we're jointly incented in the same way. I find it just, whether or not you go down a particular vector first is fine, but like you need to go through it understanding it's multifaceted. The other thing, just echoing the example and focus on automation. Mm-hmm. Everybody has to be on board and understand that that is a fundamental requirement and a goal. And I think what you'll find when you have real conversations with different people in different disciplines is that they don't know, they're not necessarily on board with that for rational or altruistic or the business reasons. They want to understand, well, what is their role in a highly automated place? And until we talk about that elephant in the room, about what is the work, right? If that's being automated away, where does it go? Am I a part of that? That's all part of that incentives, conversation, and be forthright about that, about what does that mean? Another thing about automation that people often miss, I describe automation as simply documentation put into action. Right. So there's an inherent value of transparency about automation. It's not just about taking the burden away of actually doing the work. It's that it is visible to all that care to look at it. and understand what it means and can, in theory, improve it and adapt it as needed.
Yeah.
That's critical to get to the level, that transparency is critical to get to the level of collaboration to make any of this successful.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there, but
No,
I think
Colin,
those are the key
that's tremendous. I think that a long time ago, I came up with a WIFM, WIFM, as an acronym. You know,
Yes.
what's in it for me? When you know, early days of change management, you have to pay attention to that, and I'm pretty sure it's in Kotter's 12 steps or whatever. You know, it's all over the place, and I think the transparency of automation. You know, it's written down. It has to be written down. It has to be made explicit. Really good points. Gentlemen, I just realized that it is just all gentlemen. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you very much to GitLab to asking us to talk about this important topic. Thank you to the Inspired Business team in the background who've been sitting there quietly making sure everything carries on working. I'll pause just for a moment, and we've had to, you know, as I've said, we've had a few questions in from the participants as we've gone along, and we've answered them as we go, but I'll pause just to see if there are any final ones. Whilst anybody who is thinking about that types it in or doesn't, just to affirm that the responses to the polls that Inspired Business Media have been asking will be part of their follow-up back to you. So that'll be, the findings there will be shared with everybody who joined us. I think that's probably it. So thank you very much, everybody. Good to see you, and thank you very much, and thank you, Christine, for your positive response. It's been good fun listening, being part of this. Thank you very much indeed.